Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Selamat petang. My name is Xinwei Chuang. I'm the CEO and founder of this AI company called Pen.ai. And for those of you in the audience who speak Bahasa, excuse me, you would know that we play with the word pandai. P-A-N-D-A-I, we put a dot in between because we are an AI company. But pandai in Bahasa, of course, means clever. So we like to think that we work with very clever people, learning from them, and to build very clever solutions. And speaking of clever, speaking of pandai, today we have three pandai people, people who are highly intelligent, who can bring a lot to the table to talk about the hot topic of the day, AI. So without further ado, let me throw my distinguished panelists a question to get the ball rolling. Now, before you answer these questions, Michael, Abby, and Suthen, I would like you to introduce yourself, and then you can continue with the questions. So the first questions I would like to ask you is, in a fast-paced world of AI development, how does your organizations, which is Microsoft, BCGs, and Grab, all distinguished companies, how does your organization stay updated and ahead of the curve? And perhaps, Abby, for you, you can talk about your views from advising so many other big corporates on what you see. So over to you. Maybe you start with Michael.
Okay, yeah, hi everybody, I'm Michael. I'm the startup digital native leader for the ASEAN region for Microsoft. It's great to be here. I think I remember being the very first tech in Asia, so it's awesome to see how much it's grown. So how do we do it? I mean, I think I'm lucky to be at Microsoft because obviously we have all the best toys when it comes to the AI stuff. So we have some of the internal co-pilots. We've had internal search engines that are custom versions of the ChatGPT running, but on our own data to find stuff. And then we're all kind of using it in our personal work for documents and summaries. So yeah, we're pretty heavy into it ourselves, and then I encourage my team to use it, and a lot of our planning docs and things we do are all kind of greatly aided by ChatGPT. So that's kind of where we're at today. Yeah.
What about you, Abby?
Great. I'll quickly introduce myself. So I'm Abby. I'm the principal venture architect for BCG X. So BCG X, we're the tech build and design unit of BCG. So we leverage the BCG consulting knowledge in different industry functions and build business for big corporates. Xing, you were asking me what I've seen as our clients, what they're thinking, and also what BCG is thinking. Number one, what we've seen is all the CEOs we're talking to, they're talking about AI, they're talking about generative AI. Every single one of them has ChatGPT on their phone. So it is definitely, I think, especially with generative AI, it's definitely democratize AI, I think make it more accessible to a lot of more companies. But that's what we see. So there's a lot of interest. And then for BCG, we actually have an internal knowledge management system using large language model, but we're using it more internally. So that's one thing. And we also, for us, we're doubling down on one is climate, the second one is AI. So really there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of interest, a lot of things happening. And then I think with the CEOs we're talking to, I think everyone is exploring to build a proof of concept across the value chain of their business. So they're trying to see how they can, catch up with the trend. So that's what we see. Yep.
Excellent. Suthen?
Hi everyone. I'm Suthen. I lead engineering at Grab. In terms of how we look at really embracing this, I'd say we think about it from a systems perspective, and a system that covers five things. Firstly, clear objectives. Secondly, processes. Third, tools, incentives, and then finally, leadership role modeling. Let's go through it in that order. So in terms of a clear objective, the way we think about any of these, AI, but any technology is working backwards from the customers. And in our case, it's driver partners, merchant partners, and consumers like many of you might be. And we ask ourselves, how can we use this to create value in a sustainable fashion for these customers. So we don't kind of use the technology for its own sake, but really starting from a thesis of how it can create that value. The second is then kind of really creating the incentive structures to encourage this, creating the culture around it. So obviously, we encourage people to share knowledge. We break down silos. We actually celebrate failure as well. So if you do something with these new technologies, and typically, if the younger they are, the more likely your proof of concept is also going to show proof of problems. We encourage people to share that openly and also tell everyone what they learn from it. The third is in terms of processes. We have regular working groups that are structured to explore these areas. We have syncs with leaderships where we talk about the roadmaps that are using them. We also have hackathons. So we organize the most recent Grabathon, which is our annual hackathon, was about generative AI. Finally, we also build out a lot of internal tools to support the exploration, so we pave the road for people to use this. Early on, we built something called GrabGPT, which wraps different API providers to provide a chat GPT-like experience, but within a secure environment. We have a tool called Spell Vault, which allows you to take documents, input it into a vector database, and then chat with the documents. So if you have 100 pages of compliance documents and you want to ask a question, instead of reading the whole thing, you can ask a question on a document. And finally, we do leadership role modeling, and that's both the leaders kind of being excited about it themselves. Anthony regularly uses tools like this to help draft emails or communication. So there's a bit of that also, just kind of telling the organization that we're paying attention to this, so should you.
Well, excellent. I especially like the point about about the proof of problems and celebrating failures. I mean, this is something that I guess a lot of us in the audience who are in the startup arena will probably can take away and learn something from it. Now, speaking of startup, I forgot to mention earlier that I'll be moderating this panel in real life as if I'm getting advice from three very clever, three very intelligent and experienced persons. So my role here is I would be taking the role of a startup founder, trying to learn from these experts what is it that they are doing in the world of AI. And what I'm going to do later as well is I'll leave plenty of room for Q&A so that you guys get a chance to ask them questions, not just me monopolizing the conversations. So second question, to keep the ball rolling, second questions. What are the key indicators that you think a company should monitor when they are considering whether to build their own AI infrastructures versus leveraging existing platform? I guess it's go back to the questions of build versus buy. And perhaps we re-rig things a little bit and start with Abby first this time. Yeah.
Great, sure. I think I'll maybe elaborate a bit more on the specific of what we see for Gen AI, whether people are considering buy or considering build on their own. I think we were just talking about yesterday, right? Baidu announced its own new large language model. I think that was an example of for large language model, there are already huge companies that are building very mature or very advanced large language models. So for that, probably it's not a good idea to build your own. But I think there's a difference between large language model and the platform. And I was talking to our engineering team. Usually for platform, companies do personalize it. So I think it really depends on which part you're talking about. And then when we are advising our clients, when we're talking to our clients, usually we advise them to look at, you do need to make sure your team has good prompt engineers, because how you use large language model is really subject to how good your prompt is. So think about that. Think about your organization. So that's what we're looking at right now.
This is off the script, but prompt engineering, I have arguments saying that prompt engineering is a skill set, not necessarily a career. What is your response to that?
What is that?
Prompt engineering is a skill set, not a career, not an occupation. What is your...
We will see as it develops whether it's a skill set that the core engineers all should have, or it can be developing to further a career path. We'll see. I think there's many unknowns.
Okay. Now, Suthen, do you want to respond to that, and feel free to respond to the prompt engineering questions, or the KPI questions.
Yeah, so on the build versus buy conversation, and maybe contextualized to AI as well, I think the first thing folks need to think about is actually think about it from the perspective of the stack. Where in the stack do you want to build? Where do you want to buy? And this is related to Abby's point as well. I think for the vast majority of use cases, it's unlikely you're going to build your own foundational model, just purely from the cost and technical expertise required to do it. So how do you navigate this conversation of where to build versus buy? I think there are kind of 4 considerations that at least I use when kind of looking at it. The first is just purely a requirements one. One is just what are the requirements that are intrinsic to your business to make to create value, and is building going to create that value, or can buying get you that value as well? And then there are, of course, the extrinsic requirements to your business. So this may not have anything to do with your actual customer value proposition, but have to do with either the regulatory or compliance environment your business operates in. So it might turn out that it's better to build or to buy, but you are not allowed to because the way what is built, or what you're buying doesn't comply with regulations. The second is, of course, the cost and capacity dimension. What can you afford? And if you're going to build it yourself, do you have the capacity to do it? What will it cost you to do it? I think it's important here, as you think about it, also think about total cost of ownership. Often when people talk about building things themselves, they talk about that initial stage, the fun part of building it and making it, but there's a long-term cost of maintenance. There's a long-term cost of keeping that capability competitive over time. The third part I talk about would be time to market, like are you crunched on time? The fourth, I'd say, is a bit more of a horizontal question, which is reversibility. Is this a one-way door or a two-way door? And what strategies we can do to mitigate against it? And kind of the way I think about these questions typically is to you put each of those considerations in rows on a table, and then in columns you do build it yourself, company X, company Y, company Z. What can they provide you? And you also should have some idea between these 4 or 3 considerations, what is most important to you? It might be that there are some capabilities you want out there, but it'll take you too long to build it, and you're optimizing for time to market. Then you might have to make the trade-off that, hey, actually, we probably could build it if we had enough time or the capacity, but since we're optimizing for time to market, we're actually going to go out and buy something. But that's generally how we look at thinking about it. At Grab, in terms of sharing our own experience, we went down the buy path for a lot of the stuff that sits above the foundational model, the build path for a lot of the stuff that sits above the foundational models. And this, to the point I was making earlier about where you sit in the stack, for our perspective, the foundational models to us should be interchangeable. We're not locking into one model right now, and so we're building a lot of capacity in terms of making sure we can target different models for different use cases and basically route across each of those models based on the use case that you're in.
So if you're saying that you are buying the foundational models and then you get your team to build on top of the foundational models, does it mean that us, the startup, has no chance selling to Grab?
Sorry, say that again? Or should you start with Grab?
So if you're building so many things in-house, does it mean that the startups amongst the audience here have no chance selling to you?
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, look, I think actually buildings like startups have, any company has an advantage because of their consumer value proposition. There are a lot of problems that Grab doesn't solve that you can solve. And often you have to ask yourself, will building this capability, whether it's foundational models, AI, or any other part of your infrastructure stack, allow you to solve that problem effectively? Okay,
so now we know. Micah, build versus buy.
Yeah, I think it's actually rent because you don't buy it. So I would say you want to rent over build, probably in most of the use cases, unless you're trying to be OpenAI or Inflection or somebody. But good luck getting GPUs, good luck affording the capital expenditures to put that in place. So I think in most cases you're renting. And I think a lot of people, when you talk to them who even think they need to build, once you really work out what they're trying to do, you can generally show them they don't need to. Because a lot of people think there's like a feature or some specific thing they have to ship. They're like, oh, I need to build that. And then if you walk them through actually how it works, you can show them that they actually don't, and it would be easier for them not to, right? For sure, 100% of the use case is not going to apply, but I would say it's even greater than 90 that you can just rent this stuff and get busy. And like he says, you'll get to outputs much faster, right? Because if you want to go like train a model, it could literally take you weeks, X costs, and it turns out you got something wrong. You don't get to go back and fix it. You start over, right? So it's quite expensive. So I think most startups in the region, this is pretty easy. Could you actually afford to build? Probably not, right?
Okay, cool. See, I told you these guys are very clever. Actually, piggyback on what Michael is saying. Now, this question is specific to Michael.
He likes to pick on me, by the way. I'm
real.
ready.
Now, given Microsoft's vast portfolio, can you share some insight on how startups can effectively leverage your tools, your platforms like Azure, for example, to advance their AI capabilities?
Yeah, so Microsoft's a pretty bad marketing company, so I'm here to kind of help that. So we have a pretty cool program called Founders Hub. Anybody can sign up as a startup, and you get the whole Microsoft infrastructure tool chain and everything basically for free. So that's kind of where you can start. I think from our perspective of like how people help, I think it depends what you're trying to build and what you need to do. And I think we've generally seen, I think he touched upon this, if you're out there to build, like let's be specific, if you're out there to build a new AI company, I think we have to put that out there as like a separate conversation, like yourself or some others. You have a very specific thing you do and you're focused on AI. But let's go to the normal, general population of startups. AI is going to be something that take advantage of to build a better version of themselves. So it could be like what he mentioned with the, hey, we have internal docs, and we see this every time. Like almost every startup we've seen, and even the very large startups, a very similar pattern. I want to play with this stuff, and I want to make it easy for people internally to get their work done faster. So it's like, let's put all our HR docs together. You ask a question, you get an answer. You don't have to bug the HR person. Great, save some money, right? Second thing you see people doing is we should push something down to the users in front of the people so that we can make a call center cheaper, we can make support things work better. You'll get instant responses from somebody, but it's a bot, and you'll feel better about how customer service works. Like that's usually step number 2. Once they get through these 2 steps, they start to realize that this isn't hype, it isn't crypto, it isn't some fad, it's actually legitimate. Then they start saying, what could we ship that is something new or novel that we've never done before? What's a new version of ourselves? What's a new revenue line? Like these are the patterns we see play out time and time again, regardless of vertical, like rinse and repeat, which makes sense because you kind of want to play, keep it internal, get used to it, feel better about building these things, understand the cost models. Then you start to say, oh, this works. We should push it in front of users, but let's do it in a way that's like not so scary. That's the chat bot. And then the third thing is, wow, this is really cool. We should go build something new with it. We kind of see this as a pattern. Microsoft's trying to provide the tool chain for all of these patterns. Plus, if you're a startup, practically giving you most of it for free for a couple years so that you can figure it out. That's generally what we're trying to do.
All right, so the keyword I keep hearing here is that it's practically free.
Yeah, it's more than practically. It's basically free. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. I think a lot of people in the audience can take note of that. Next, I'd like to move on to Abby. Question for Abby is that now, given your experience with a variety of businesses, advising them, what are the common pitfalls that you think companies fall into when adopting AI? And specifically, maybe you want to take the lens of Gen AI.
Yeah, I think we talk a lot about Gen AI. So when we are talking to our clients, when we are talking to our big corporates, we usually describe this rule called 10, 20, 70. What it means is in order to make your adoption of either AI or Gen AI successful, 10 is about technology, 20 is about data, and the rest 70 is all about your change management, your people dynamics, your process. So having technology and data is an important starting point, but how you are able to build that into the whole process, that people are actually able to use it for everyday business, that's something I think might be ignored by a lot of companies. So that's something we really will advise our clients to do. And I think that, I think that's probably one thing that we really see. Yeah.
Wow, 70% change management.
Yeah, so I think like, for example, if you are building just a proof of concept, that thing works doesn't mean it's going to be a scalable product that you can use across your organization. So how do you ensure that as the model is changing, the business is evolving, you actually have a structure in place to answer to that? So that's what I meant.
Got it. All right, next moving on to Suthen. Now, Grab is obviously a tech giant. What were some of the most significant AI-driven opportunities that fuel your growth? And were they more revenue-driven or more aimed at cost saving?
I'd say it's a mix of both, Shin. So let me talk kind of three broad areas in which we've found the greatest ROI in using machine learning or generative AI to some extent, but machine learning as well as both non-deep learning as well as deep learning approaches. The first one was actually just purely on the basis of the scale of the marketplace, finding areas to optimize. Just for context, Grab serves 1 in 20 Southeast Asians. We process millions of transactions a day, which means any marginal improvement you can make on any transaction or any flow multiplies up very quickly in terms of improvements for the business. And this is where we've seen kind of the greatest both revenue opportunities as well as cost reduction opportunities in this case. In the context of, for example, if you're thinking about ETA prediction, how long does it take for a person to travel a road segment? We've used machine learning models to kind of improve those predictions based on a variety of factors, including traffic conditions, past history, time of the day, as well as weather patterns as well. If you look at things like, one thing we're trialing actually right now in a few of our markets, Singapore, Indonesia, and Vietnam, is this concept of a ride guide, where we actually have kind of like a system that sits beside the driver and guides them where can you go and find more, like a co-pilot, tells you where can you go and find, not with a capital C, lowercase c, but where can you find more business. And finally, we do things like, we use, again, machine learning models to predict how long does it take to prepare a dish? Because what we try to do is get the time that the driver arrives in the restaurant to pick up a food order to be exactly the time when the dish is done with its preparation. So they're not waiting there for the food to be cooked. And you can imagine if, each of these 1 minute, 2 minutes saved here, multiply it by millions of transactions a day, can really kind of both reduce the cost because, at the end of the day, drivers are organically earning more money on the platform because they're getting more activity on the platform from from delivering orders or giving rides, which then allows us to pass those savings on to the consumers. The second and third areas, one is personalization, so really kind of making our recommendations more relevant to our users, helping people discover new things that they'd like to eat based on the data, based on the past behavior that we have. The final thing is in decisioning, really kind of improving our decision process and accelerating it on some level. And this happens a lot in credit decisioning where we're able to decide very quickly whether or not to issue some sort of loan or lending product to a partner of ours.
Thank you. Now, I'm mindful of time. I think we have about 20 minutes more, including Q&A. But I'm trying to leave more room for Q&A. So I'm just going to skip some questions and perhaps ask you guys an additional 1 or 2 questions. This is open for all, so jump in anyone, anytime. Number 1 is privacy remains a top concern for consumers as well as businesses. So what kind of advice do you have for startups so that they are not only compliant with regulations, but also are able to safeguard user data? If you'd like to speak from your own organization experience, I think that would be appreciated as well. Anyone? How do?
Go first. You go first. I think this one's pretty simple. So it's generally the things that we've shipped at Microsoft were specifically to address this. So the notion of the partnership with OpenAI is that you run the LLM, you basically like a mirror of it in your own tenants. And then all the work you're doing, from calling it to fine-tuning it to getting stuff out, and it's in your own tenant. So it's no different than a database, right? Your database sits on your own tenant, so all the normal security, privacy rules stay intact, plus there's no training of the model outside to the engine, right? So it's pretty easily answered in that regard. I think then you're just talking about the normal issues around securing your tenants and the normal issues around data privacy and whatever else you're doing for where you need to run your data from a location or data center perspective. So I think there's been probably a little too much emphasis around this problem because people were naturally thinking that everything I do is training the model, or every time I type something in, it's going there and coming back. But you don't think about this when you run your own databases. So this is no different. You're just running your own copy of it in your own tenants. So the basic rules for cloud operations apply at that point.
Got it. Although I also hear oftentimes that organizations are afraid to send anything, whether it's private tenant or not, into LLM.
Well, she could probably talk to this too, because I think you've probably experienced this. So there's been nothing like this in our generation, right? To where the C-suite executives have downloaded an app to where they're doing AI stuff on their phone almost before the IT team got to even wrapping their heads around what do we do with this. Mm-hmm. So it's created this phenomenon that they're playing with something that's delightful at the same time, I think for everybody, could be scary, is also opens up all these questions. So then of course they will say, I worry about, like you said, hallucinations. I worry about this. That's great. Well, that's because the executive team has never been probably hit so hard with a technology that's moving incredibly fast and is almost compounding. So then I think you will have all these questions. And I think it's good to have those questions, the ethics, the security, the privacy. But I think they're all answerable. Because, no, it doesn't go back and train the model. Okay, that's easy answer. No, it's living in your tenant. So I think they're answerable, but sometimes when you take a non-technical cohort of business executives who are then playing with this very powerful thing, they have a lot of great questions. And I think it's awesome, but they're great discussions, they're easily had, and I think you can inoculate the fear and trepidation thing pretty much in the first meeting from all my experiences. Like it's because you can just demonstrate all this stuff. But I think this is good, and I think it's just showing like why else has this stuff been moving so fast? Because the business and the tech is colliding at almost a pace that's no one's ever seen outside of maybe when the internet showed up or when mobile showed up. I mean, this is the next thing. And it was the same thing when you had your phone, like, oh no, what's happening? But we've answered all those questions, right? So I think it's the same with AI. And it's early days too. Like, I think we're forgetting this is barely a year into maybe the zeitgeist that we're speaking about. So it would be normal that those are the questions. And I think that's okay.
Great. Now, curious to know what Suthen and Abby has to say.
Okay, I think that, I agree with you. Maybe just two quick points. The first point is more, I was just discussing with our engineering team. I think they were saying there are a few specific things you can do, which is like, one, maybe use a cloud provider like Azure for the LLM, number one. Number two, maybe you can remove the personal data before you send it, or maybe you can use it within your own infrastructure, what you were talking about. But then I think when we were also discussing it more on a business case, what we think is it's important to look at this whole responsible AI thing, like to really look at what is your company's value, what's your startup's value, what is your risk appetite, what is your governance, can you implement that privacy protection from the end-to-end process, and then can you make that part of your governance? So I think both sides, technical sides, maybe you can do some tricks there. And then more, I guess, value side, business side, you can think it more holistically. What is your appetite there?
Suthen, before you answer, feel free to disagree with anyone, including myself.
You know,
He wants to fight.
I think panels get spicier when that happens. And unfortunately, on this specific, I'm on low chili content. I'd say lots of good stuff earlier. Maybe the only thing I'd add is I think with GAI, there are a class of things that are invariant despite the emergence of GAI. Like I think treating your users' data with respect, looking at their welfare, privacy by design as you design your business, like even if we didn't have this advent of generative AI, LLMs, and so on, those would be good policies to have anyway. And you can put those into practice, even if all you have is a single MySQL database that you're running as your startup. In terms of the specific concerns that I think we're seeing in relation to generative AI, have been on some level, the virtue of a large language model is also its vice, which is its flexibility and ability to answer in very natural ways also makes it fundamentally unpredictable. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't use it, but you have to just go in with open eyes that that's the case. And that means kind of a few new surface areas emerge in terms of the possibility of both security vulnerabilities and therefore privacy issues potentially emerging. So some of you would have heard about prompt injection or the ability, if you're using retrieval augmented generation, if you're sending in information to the model to use in-context learning to help it answer a question that's coming from the user, make sure that data that you're sending into the model, for example, doesn't contain personally identifiable information. It doesn't contain data that you don't want people to be able to extract, an adversarial actor or a bad actor from being able to extract from the model as they interact with it. So I think using, again, that principle of privacy by design, what you need to look at is this technology has a bunch of strengths. It also has some new areas that we need to be concerned about. Let's design around that to make sure whatever tooling we build around it actually ensures that it behaves in a way that's in accordance with our policies and the ethics of a company.
We are out of time. So with that, I'd like to bring the end to this panels. So thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much, Abby.
Thanks,
and
everyone.
Suthen.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.